to understand the past, but to build a future that inspires us. And we are also pleased to say that whilst there's much more work to do, we are beginning to see the dividends of the work we've already done. We have a theory of compliance where we treat most taxpayers as honest, and that our job is to help them fulfill their obligations, whilst at the same time present a credible threat to those who choose, for any reason, to break the law. And we therefore have a clear strategic intent that our approach is not based on enforced compliance, but voluntary compliance. And that then informs the 9 strategic objectives that we have tabled 4 years ago, and we have consistently used to frame everything that we do. And I remind the members of the committee again what these 9 are, and we consistently have tabled our strategic plan as well as our APP every year, using these 9 strategic objectives as the framework through which the plan is crafted. We organized ourselves very specifically to serve the taxpayer and trader better, to understand that not all taxpayers are the same. We have to segment them in terms of their particular need. For example, a standard income earner is not the same as a wealthy individual. A vendor or a small business trader is not the same as a large corporate. Someone who uses a trust has a very different need to someone who manages an NGO. And so every component of our tax base has to segment it to their uniqueness. And then very importantly, we should not treat all taxpayers the same. Whilst our treatment must be fair, professional, and equitable, it must be differentiated by the compliance behavior that a taxpayer presents to us. And so those 3 things are very important in the way that we conceptualize our compliance model, and it informs our compliance program. Taxpayer-focused segmentation to differentiate the needs of taxpayers, and compliance-driven that responds to what the compliance risk or otherwise that a taxpayer presents to us. Obviously, an accountable and capable leadership team is important, and a highly engaged employee base with a positive culture of engagement and excellence in our performance. So from that, you can see, Honorable Chair and members, that SARS from the very outset was very clear about the journey it would embark on and the components that would make up its plan. And the results we report is a direct outcome of the clarity and focus with which we seek to implement that. We were also clear that there are a few things we have to do as must-win battles. The first is that the tax base must be broadened. Not everyone who is in the base necessarily should be in the base, is in the base. We have a lot of work to do there. You will see later on also in terms of our compliance index, we have a lot of work to do with ensuring the integrity of our register is what it needs to be. Making sure that we move towards a culture of fiscal citizenship and voluntary compliance is important for us. Leveraging our resources, we are mindful that we work with taxpayers' money and therefore continually are charged to achieve more with less. We are not alone, so we have spent a significant amount of time to rekindle and establish very functional and constructive partnerships with agencies in government. We are exceptionally dependent and interdependent on the Hawks, on the South African Police Service, on the Border Management Agency, on Home Affairs, on the Department of Agriculture, and on the National Prosecuting Authority to be effective. And so we sit on these committees. We have bilateral MOUs that sets out the relationship, and we enact and behave to give effect to those memoranda of understanding. And lastly, it does not matter if we achieve everything, but in the process destroy public trust, and therefore being an organization with integrity that can be trusted and admired is very essential to the ultimate sustainable performance of a revenue administration such as SARS. In tabling the APP today, Honourable Chair and members, I'd like to just recap specifically in relation to last year, because that now sets the base for this year. The performance, I had earlier shared with you the trends over the 4-year period, but I would very quickly share with you the performance highlights of the last year. We will cover that in terms of revenue, compliance, and program and people development. We have 3 mandate objectives: net revenue, and last year we increased net revenue by 123 billion to 1.687 trillion. We improved compliance by 1.3 percentage points to 64.2%, and trade facilitation grew by 606 billion to an amount of 3.931 trillion rand. Here is our highlights, and I will ask Mr. Johnson, our Chief Revenue Officer, just to spend a minute to take you through these highlights.
Thank you, Commissioner, and honourable members. We indicated that at a gross level, it's quite important for us that we reflect on the gross level, because largely we are of the view that we pay refunds as the economy calls for those refunds. So we saw 2.07 trillion in gross revenues that we received, which is a 9.7% growth in terms of the prior in comparison to the prior year. I think this is quite important if you consider that the economy nominally is growing at around 5.8%, and therefore this growth of 9.7% is quite considerable. We paid 381 billion in refunds in the year. The Commissioner mentioned earlier that this is quite a historic milestone in that we've never paid that amount of refunds before. Particularly important is that within that 381 billion, there is 318 billion of VAT refunds that we have paid, which is a growth of 22%. VAT refunds are quite important. It's the most frequent refund that we pay, and it was quite encouraging in the year that we were able to put back that quantum of refunds into the fiscal framework or into the economy. Just for, again, scale, that number of refunds is close to 5% of GDP. So it's quite considerable that we are able to pay that refunds out. At a net level, we have reported that we have collected 1.687 trillion in refunds, a growth of just below 8%. And again, this is quite encouraging in that it's 123 billion in rand value, more than what we collected in the prior year. We have indicated that our compliance from a voluntary index point of view has seen 1.3 percentage points growth. And again, lifting up the index by just 1 percentage point in a base that has got in excess of 23 million taxpayers, it's quite a significant number to be able to achieve. But we continue to challenge ourselves to ensure that we achieve significant progress in this regard over the medium term. We've seen fruits of our focus on our compliance efforts, and we will continue to focus on this because we believe that whatever happens in the economy needs to be somehow countered by the efforts that the tax administration undertakes. In this regard, we are glad to report the 231 billion of compliance revenue, which is 7.5% more than the 214.5 billion that we reported last year. Again, showing a trajectory that goes up. Trade facilitation, the Commissioner has indicated just shy of 4 trillion is what we have in total trade, is what we've been able to facilitate. And for scale, again, that relates to plus minus 7.1 million declarations that we've had to process the tax administration. And again, that shows the investment in the people that have to process that number of declarations, as well as the technology that we employ to do that. Thank you very much, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Makubu. The rest, Honourable Chair and members, are detail. I will not take you through that now. You have the slides and the book with you, so you're welcome to ask any questions. But just to say again that in managing the revenue, we are very clear that within any given economy, the Minister sets a revenue estimate, but in order to harvest that, we have to manage two other things very well. The first is we have to make sure we build institutional capability within SARS, we design and give effect to a compliance program, and that we build the capability and capacity using a data-driven operating model that synthesizes technology, data, artificial intelligence, and people into a highly efficient. There is no way we can process 26 million taxpayers' returns using only manual interventions by people. And then secondly, we are very, very mindful that we hold in trust the money of the public, and therefore we owe it to South Africa to be an institution that they can have confidence in. But the reality is that SARS is an institution of government, and therefore our well-being and the confidence in SARS is also linked to confidence in government, the quality of expenditure, and also to the sense of public goods, the benefit that public believes they receive from the goods. So when we reported our trends with both the revenue achievement, the institutional engagement, and the public trust, it sits behind ultimately what creates the outcomes that we share with you. These are just a restatement of what Johnston shared with you earlier. The next slide simply gives you that by tax type. I won't dwell on that. Turning to our compliance program, this is the component of the work we do where taxpayers do not of their own volition give the money to SARS, which means that if SARS did not do this work, we would be short 238, almost 232 billion rand. And the graph just shows you the breakdown of that. I will not dwell on that, but we're happy to take questions in this regard. I then, just for detail, share with you the work that sits behind it. So when we tell you that in the 232 billion rand, for example, is 76.5 billion of additional revenue that was raised through the completion or resolution of over 1.7 million cases of outstanding debt, that we issued 730,000 final demands, that we appointed over 230,000 third-party appointments, that we issued over 41,000 civil judgments. By way of example, that work collectively accounted for over 80 billion of revenue. On the custom side, we can tell you how many seizures we executed. These are interventions that we had to, of this over 7 million interventions that we've had to conduct through our SARS officials with the risk profiling that we do collectively to the value of over 6 billion rand. And the revenue that we have been able to harvest almost 14 billion rand, which is additional cash of 4.25 billion rand, and preventing the outflow of almost 10 billion rand. And so I can take you through each of these. I'm not going to go through every list, but to point to the categories. There's a number of activities in the criminal and illicit economy that we have conducted. State capture particularly, we have concluded 46 audits. We have 78 criminal investigation cases in progress. We have completed 22 cases. And so each of these represent a specific quantum of work that forms part of our compliance program. So when SARS talks about its compliance program, these are the activities that is conducted by the 12,500 people of SARS. And when I am asked, what is it that we do to deliver the result? My answer is, it is not one big thing that we do. It is thousands and millions of little things that we do every day with fanatical focus to ensure that we leave no stone unturned, or in terms of the analogy that we use, that we leave no inch behind to ensure that the revenue that is due to the fiscus is indeed collected. In terms of the work we do through data and artificial intelligence, it is of the almost 16 million returns that we had to process last year, about 2 million of them were selected through our risk engine, our machine learning algorithms, as submissions that may contain some level of risk. And then our employees do further verification work on those returns. And that work collectively have produced over 76 billion rand as well. And so we can go through each of these in the large business center, a huge focus on base erosion and profit shifting, completed 25 audit cases to the value of over 4 billion rand. 4 billion rand, and focusing on some of the themes that have become risk themes for us, the way that corporates structure their affairs, the elaborate schemes that they design to erode their tax base in South Africa, and therefore to transpose revenue that should be due in South Africa into foreign jurisdictions. In terms of specialized audit, we continue to focus on lifestyle audits, luxury vehicle audits, religious entity audits, but we also last year focused on the visiting artists, and were able to raise assessments in this regard when companies do not implement the withholding tax requirement when artists visit South Africa. On our voluntary compliance index, we have seen an increase, as I said, from 62.9 to 64.2%. And this slide just shows you the subcategories of that. The area that we are still concerned in and requires a significant amount of work is the regression in the registration compliance. And this year, we will make a specific focus on that. But pleasingly, we see an upward compliance trend in the other areas of filing compliance, declaration compliance, and payment compliance. I will again invite Dr. Rebone Habo to share with you the results from a public confidence survey that we've done.
Thank you, Commissioner, and good morning, honorable members. Earlier, Commissioner, you mentioned that the attitude towards compliance increased. And if you look at the slide, it actually is on the uptick, and we are sitting at 76.3. These are the dimensions that talks to a an index that we have, which is the attitude towards compliance index. And all these elements are actually on an increase if you look at them, and they indicate a positive move towards the attitude that the community have towards us. So a few of them that I can raise that are important. For example, we have 2 basis point increase in majority of them, but fiscal citizenship is quite important for us, which is increasing to 7.7 points. And the other one that is important is tax morality. If you look at it, it's also on the upward trend. I will not mention all of them, but this is just an important index for us to look at what are the elements that are critical for us to check what the public is saying about us. And if you also look at the affinity there, it shows a downward movement. However, it is a positive because it actually talks about how people used to think about SARS before, and now they are moving closer towards us to increase the positive attitudes towards SARS. Over to you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Rebone. I want to point out just operational efficiency. It is where taxpayers feel we are more efficient. Now, we are the first to say that every ball that we drop is a ball too many. We have a long way to go with challenges in our contact center, and we still here and there miss the mark in terms of turnaround time. But at the same time, the composite effect through other work that we do, such as auto assessment, educating and making taxpayers more aware, have on an overall level given factually but also perceptually the experience of a more efficient SARS. Understandably, we will know that Twitter is a loud hailer, social media is a loud hailer. So we often hear a lot of that on Twitter. But I think what these public surveys, which are far wider, demonstrates is that there is an overall improvement in the experience that taxpayers have when they engage with SARS. People development is another important area. And we have highlighted also with the same level of clarity with what we want to achieve in the compliance program. We have highlighted with similar clarity that we want to focus on leadership. We've developed a clear leadership model. We want to put women in the center of our Women in Leadership program that is gaining momentum. We want to focus on the next generation leaders. So we have a junior board. In fact, we now have just started the nomination process for the second junior board that will be chosen. And focusing not only on bringing in new people into SARS, but we've also last year in just over about 40% of them were from the outside and about 6 internally, in addition to bringing in a new generation of young people, graduates and customs cadets, and we will continue to provide internships so that we address, at least in a small way, the huge problem of youth unemployment in South Africa. We can share with you with great sense of accomplishment that the Nugent recommendations on reparations, which was at the heart of the distrust that people felt, have now been substantively completed. We have put in place a career development framework, and I'll ask my colleague in a moment, Mr. Basi, to just take you through that very quickly. We have had a huge focus on positive employee engagement, and I'll ask my colleague, Rafilwe Pakala, focus on really a post-COVID employee value proposition